Anamari Fanthorpe, and I'll be your host today. Today, I have Paula Gair here from deriskme. She's a cybersecurity specialist, and it's right in time for cybersecurity weeks or cyber smart weeks. So really excited to get you on here today, Paula, because you are an educator, not just in this area, but in general, you're great at educating. So you make content like this really easy to understand. And as it's cyber smart week or weeks, as you let me know, it's a good time for us to delve into this topic that is ever increasingly becoming more and more and more important. So welcome.
Oh, kia ora tātou. Thank you so much for having me, Anamari. It's always a pleasure. It is Cyber Smart Weeks. I'm hoping next year we manage to get it up to a whole month. Started off as a week, and the idea is really to have that focal point around cybersecurity for a number of weeks. Because as everyone will have seen, there is so much going on in this space. We're seeing things in the news all the time around various different types of attacks. And the key message really is around what can people do to keep themselves a little bit more safe online and be a bit more cyber smart. So this year's message is really simple. There are 4 easy steps. So what I was hoping to do is in our time today to go through those steps, but also just to make this a really interactive session. So I'm really happy to stop and take questions or hear comments from any of the attendees as we go. So obviously questions in the chat, and please let me know if I miss any, and we'll stop, as we go. So please don't wait to the end for questions or comments. Also really happy if people want to share any of their own stories as well. So for example, there is a lot going on, and obviously you don't want to reveal anything that's sort of personally identifiable, but if you do want to share something that that's happened to somebody or yourself, then I think we can all learn a lot from those types of things. So let's just jump straight in. So as you said, Cyber Smart Weeks for 2022, and the key message here is that online attacks can really impact anybody. But the key thing is, I always describe, we basically don't want to be the low-hanging fruit in this area. So what I'm showing you on screen is information from CERT NZ. CERT is the New Zealand government agency that is our computer emergency response team. And they are tasked with both recording incidences of cyber issues and attacks, but also providing information so that all of us, either individually or as business owners or employees, members of our communities, can take some steps ourselves to keep ourselves safer. I'm really pleased that one of the key things that this Cyber Smart emphasis in 2022 is focusing on is around passwords. It's one of the areas that we are all pretty universally terrible at. In fact, whenever I talk to people around passwords, I see kind of eye rolling and slightly uncomfortable shifting from one foot to the other. So, please take some comfort in the fact that if you're feeling like that right now, you're not the only one. Passwords are a real pain, and they've really been designed to work well for computers, but not so well for humans. So hopefully the info I can share with you today will really help in that regard. So unfortunately, everything we've ever been told about passwords in the past is wrong. Hopefully by the end of our session today, you'll see that that's good news. But, in the past, we've been told we need uppercase, lowercase, special characters, numbers, and we've always been given sort of a minimum of an 8-character password. Now, unfortunately, human beings are often replicate the same sort of thing. So if you can imagine somebody choosing, say, password, which incidentally is the most popular password out there, if you were forced to use that sort of structure for passwords, you would probably do a capital P, an ampersand for the A, 2 5s for the S's, a W, maybe a 0 for the O, and an R and a D. And that means that it's really easy for computer programs to figure that out because we all make the same sorts of substitutions. So, if we did things that were truly random in terms of those 8 characters, things would be better. But the fact is that's not how our brains work. So what the current advice is around passwords is you need long, strong, and unique passwords. And, the longer the password is, the harder it is to crack. And it does need to be unique. And that's because if we reuse passwords from website to website, then of course it becomes very easy if someone gets access to your username and password from one data breach to try to reuse it somewhere else. So if you can imagine, during the first sort of COVID lockdowns, hundreds of thousands of people globally suddenly started using Zoom that had never used it before. A lot of those people reused passwords from other services they used. And so at a certain point, Zoom suffered an attack. It's called credential stuffing. Effectively, what happened was about 530,000 combinations of email addresses and passwords were reused. And that is nothing to do with any weakness on the Zoom side. It's just the fact that the passwords and usernames had been used somewhere else. So, to make your individual account secure, you need a unique password for every single, for every single service and online account that you use. And in terms of the length of the password, the good news is it's easier to create a password than it has ever been before. The advice is now 4 random words. So if you look around you and, maybe people want to put some suggestions in the chat, please don't use things that you actually use, but, some really random things. So from where I'm looking, I can see a flower, I can see a candle, I can see a blind, and I can see some timber. I could put those 4 words together, and that is completely random. So as long as I could remember those 4 words, I don't need to put in special characters or uppercase or lowercase, or numbers or any of those things. I just need those 4 random words. So, of course, we've all got hundreds of thousands, across, there are hundreds of thousands of services that we can all access. And so for many of us, we use hundreds of different passwords already. So I think in my password manager, I've got over 300 different passwords for different services I use. So we can't remember 300 different passwords. Well, there may be a few amongst us that can, but for most mere mortals, that's not possible. So that's where password managers come in. So a password manager is an application, so it's a piece of software where you store your usernames and passwords, and they are encrypted. So they can't then be accessed by somebody else, even if they can hack into that piece of software. And I'm going to talk to you about a little bit more about what we need to do to make ourselves even more secure in terms of so going beyond that. But I just want to show you before we move on to that, just to show you what the advice is from CERT NZ. So there's a video you can watch later, but basically you'll just see further down here. I just want to show you their little. Now, can we see that on screen? So basically their advice is, and this is really good advice, use a different password for every online account. Keep your password safe, so using a password manager. Don't use personal information. And I do want to make a little comment about that. So we're often asked when we're doing, say, security questions, things like name of school or our dog's name or the street that we grew up on, or these sorts of things. A lot of that information can be found through social media. So don't use that for security questions, but also don't put that personal information into your usernames and passwords. So you'll see a lot of people with email addresses and they might have their date of birth in there. That's not recommended because it's one piece of personal information that you really don't want everybody to know. And the same with your passwords. Often we'll sit around and we think, oh, I'm signing up to this online account. What do I do? Oh, okay, yeah, my dog's name's Spot and it's 2022. So your password ends up as Spot 2022. That's just super, super easy to crack. So 4 random words is what you're looking for a password. And, CERT recommends that obviously a random password, is also very secure. So a minimum of 10 characters. Now, just one note on this, when you log into different websites, you'll see that sometimes they will require you to use things like special characters because that's how they've been programmed. What I would recommend in that case is still try to go for the 4 random words if you can, and then incorporate the special characters. It makes it a bit harder to remember, but hopefully after today, everyone is going to be using a password manager. So that will be sort of helpful in remembering. But that's really down to the programming of that individual site, rather than the fact that that is really what is required. So I wonder, have we got any questions related to this just now, or
not
are we
as
still...
yet? We just get just LastPass is being used, and that's it. That's about it. Yeah, I use LastPass.
Okay.
I love it.
Yeah. Tell us about your use of LastPass, Anamari. Can I just ask you to tell me what you like about it? And obviously, no personal information being shared, but
yeah. So absolutely. What I love about it, I think, is that if you, I guess, like, though, if you use the free version, you can have it on your actual desktop. But if you want to have it on multiple devices, I found out you do need to pay for that. So so I only have it on the desktop because I'm just like, oh, well, I'll just manage to utilize it on that, and then anything else I need, I'll just need to jump on my computer. But what I do love about it is, especially in the work environment, our IT guy can actually share passwords through our whole team. So, and then take those passwords back if we need to. So you can actually share a password with somebody, but still have control over if they can even see it. So sometimes there's things where I can't actually see the password. So I would never be able to copy that, but I can utilize it in those apps that I need it for work, which I think is a really great security. I actually heard a horror story the other day, where the lady had outsourced her social media to somebody in the US, and they were doing like a 3 posts a day or whatever. And they've been doing it for a number of years. And because the dollar has really shifted and the US dollar is so expensive compared to the Kiwi dollar right now, it wasn't economical to kind of continue on with that service. And so she had canceled that service. But and had taken control, and then they had begged, like, oh, I won't have any money, and blah 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 blah. And so she'd been like, okay, I'll give you this, okay, fine, I'll bring you back on. And they basically went in there and took out all, like, locked them out of their own account, and is now holding their account for ransom, basically. Like, so they can't even get into their own account. And that's social media. And what we know about social media is that it's really hard to talk to somebody if you have an issue like that, and it can take years to resolve it, if you even get it resolved. So this person's now just decided, I'm not going to pay the ransom for my social media account. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new account and have to rebuild everything, which is possible to do on certain platforms. And I mean, it's a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of work, but that's kind of the breaks. But I mean, I've had this happen to me in the past, where I got locked out of I had a business partner who locked me out of my G Suite account that I was paying for. And luckily we resolved that. And because we resolved that. But when I talked to the people at Google, they were like, this could take years to resolve this.
Absolutely.
Never, you may never have access to that account again. So I just think it was a really good lesson in how much power you give people with your accounts and passwords.
I'm so glad that you
like about LastPass.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, because that's a really good case study, and we can talk about that a little bit more. So I'm going to come back to that example, maybe give people some tips, because I'm sure that's making people feel a little bit terrified. Anyone who's got
I'm sorry.
Outsourced at the moment. But it's a really good point, and it's better off to think about what could go wrong and plan for it. And so we'll talk about how to prevent that from happening. But also, just related to LastPass, I can see some more comments in the chat about it. One thing that I usually say to people, a lot of what we can do in terms of cybersecurity and privacy is free. So we should do those things. But if you're going to pay for something, I would recommend paying for a password manager, so that you've got something that you can use across all of your devices. Also, if you have family members that also want to use a password manager, then you can pay for a family sort of suite. So in that case, you might pay $5 or $6 a month, and then that might give you 5 or 6 accounts, which means, if you've got kids, you can get your kids into those good habits as they become teenagers and start managing their own passwords well. Because sort of people taking over other people's social media when they're young, when they have a little fight in the playground or something like that, or that can happen a lot. So it's really good to get into those good habits. But the example you gave of someone losing access to their accounts, it's a bit of a nightmare situation. What I would say about that is that what you need to have is every online account that you have will have somewhere that you can check the security and privacy settings. And what you need to have set up in those accounts is sort of recovery options. So you need to have a second either email address or, you know, they'll all work in slightly different ways, but you need to go through and look at what those recovery options are. And in an ideal world, if you are doing things like social media through businesses, you might be better off to use a separate tool, something like a Hootsuite or something like that, that allows you to manage access to your social media, so you're not giving over your direct username and password, because that is a super risky thing to do. Sometimes when there are business accounts, so for example, if you have a website and you're with Squarespace or something like that, you can have different roles set up. So you might maintain admin rights for yourself, so you've always got access to everything, and then you might give somebody else content editor rights. So it's really important to look at all of those sorts of things. And the things that are critical would be any of those business critical platforms. So social media, obviously accounting packages, really important to make sure you don't give people too much access there, website use, and any other business tools. So just taking a bit of time to go through and look at the privacy and security options for each of those important services that you use is time really, really well spent. So focus on what's most important: business emails, social media, anything financial. They'll be the most important things. And you know, I think trying to avoid giving people full access to something is, you know, because things can always go sour. Yeah. So gosh, I'm so sorry to hear about that. That is such
I know,
unfortunate.
I think it was like that kindness, you know, like letting the person back in because she felt bad that they weren't going to have an income anymore. And then, you know, and then to have that happen. But I mean, I think it is, although it's kind of a bit scary, I think sometimes we can be a bit trusting. And I think certainly here in Aotearoa, like we're a little bit more like family, like we're a lot smaller. We're not as exposed as much, I think, or at least we don't see it in our face as much of fraud and those kind of things as you do if you're in Europe or in the US, or, you know, you see that identity theft like a lot more in the US. And but here we're a bit more cushioned. We've got maybe more legislation. I'm not sure what actually protects us a little bit more, or maybe we're not.
I actually think what's happening is that we're starting to see, you know, a very, very constant increase in the amount of scams and frauds. So unfortunately, we're catching up. The other thing is that not everything gets reported. And so some of the estimates I've seen are that, you know, maybe reports are about a third less than the actual activity. My personal view is it's probably much more than that, because when I talk to people about the things they've experienced, one of the things I always ask them is, did you report it? And 9 out of 10 people, maybe more, say no. Because they didn't know who to report it to, and they didn't know what would happen. And sometimes if it's involves investment scams or romance scams, people feel embarrassed. Right. So that's one of the things that the scammers are kind of aiming to do, is to actually make us not want to say anything. So people will have followed recently, you know, there have been some Netflix series and there have been some docos about various people. And when those people are sort of exposed publicly, a whole lot more people come forward and say, hey, I've also been scammed by that person. So often what we know about is the tip of the iceberg. So the other thing on the sort of on the password manager and password management side is that if you put everything into your password manager, you need to have something called a second factor of authentication or multi-factor authentication with that. So if you use LastPass, you know, or Dashlane or Keeper or 1Password or any of those, then what you need to do is you need to basically add something else, whether it is a text message that you receive or a code from an authenticator app, but some extra thing that if someone got the combination of your username and password for your password manager app, that wouldn't be enough to get them in, right? And so that's just adding an extra layer. So think about cybersecurity as a kind of onion. That's an extra layer on the onion, and that is what gives you that extra bit of protection. So not only do you want to add that second factor of authentication to your password manager app, you want to add it to any important accounts. So important accounts, one of the things that people often forget about is their email account. So email is like the key to the front door, right? So we can reset so many of our accounts that are linked to a specific email account. So what I would really strongly recommend is that you add the second factor of authentication or multi-factor authentication to your email accounts, your banking, your social media, your email, and any other sort of business critical accounts. So everyone has got a different appetite for risk, and people have more or less important information stored online. So it's going to be different for everybody. But in general, if you've got the option for a second factor or multi-factor, then use it. So, I mean, two-factor authentication can be a couple of different things. It could be as simple as getting an SMS sent to your phone, right? And what that means is that you're logging into your online bank, you've added in, say, your customer number and your password, but then in order to get in, you have to add an extra code, which is a one-time code that you get texted to you. So that's one way. So, so it can be, let's think about this in terms of there's three different things that two-factor authentication could be. Something that you know, so it could be an extra password, or it could be a passphrase, it could be a security question, it could be another PIN number, something like that. So that's a third thing, as well as your username and password. It could be something you physically have, like some kind of token. I use something called a YubiKey, which is something that I have to hold up to my phone, and unless I physically have that with me, or unless I physically plug it into the USB port on my computer, then I can't get into certain accounts. Or it could be something like a Google Authenticator app, or LastPass have their own Authenticator app. And how that works is that when you set up that account, whatever it is, say it's your Gmail, you go into your security settings, you choose two-factor authentication, and you choose the option you want. Is it something that comes up within my Gmail app? Is it something that is going to be texted to my phone? Is it their authenticator? So you choose what's most convenient for you. And as long as you're using something, you're better off than most people. And then the third option is something that you are. So that could be a fingerprint scan, or it could be voice recognition. So often if you ring your bank, they'll say, they'll ask you to repeat a phrase, like the standard one is, my voice confirms my identity. And your voice is more unique than your fingerprint, interestingly enough. And so they're all different options for two-factor authentication. And adding that as that extra layer to passwords that's really the critical thing. You know, you can do all the right things with passwords, but you don't want just your username and password to be enough to get you into those accounts.
I've got a question about you. So say you're using two-factor authentication and you're using a password manager, system like LastPass. So you go into your Gmail, it automatically puts in your username and your password. Does it then send you to your two-factor authentication? So then you need to still do that second factor. So it'll remember the main password, but you'd still need that, SMS code. Or can you program that into your LastPass as well?
Yeah, so what you can do is you've got multiple ways of dealing with that. One of the ways is that you can, for example, if you're using a device that you haven't used before, you can then say, when you log into that device, recognize this device for 30 days. So you might just say, okay, I'm never going to be having my computer anywhere where it's not going to be secure. So I'm happy to do that. So when you set up your LastPass or other password manager, there's lots of different security and access options. And the best way to think about it is, partly in terms of physical security. So if you are traveling a lot, if you're prone to losing devices, if you think you're worried that you might leave it on the bus, this type of thing, then you want to have the maximum level of security where you're prompted for that second factor every time. If you are in a situation where you're working in your home office, you don't leave the front door wide open, so this computer's pretty secure, then you might say, actually, once I've logged in once, then recognize that for 30 days, and you only have to do it occasionally. So you have to decide what works for you. And I would also say it's the physical security side, but also what information is stored. So critical things like your password manager, you should use that second factor of authentication every single time. But then the individual passwords within that, you have to make a decision. Again, with our email accounts, we may have one email account that's just kind of, I'm chatting to my friends, maybe I get a few notifications about a few things I've subscribed to, but that email account's not linked to anything like my bank or social media or any of those things. So I might have less security associated with that. I might not require second factor every time I log into that. And the thing is, just experiment with what works for you. Obviously, more security is better, but if it gets to the point where it creates an obstacle for you and you switch it off because you don't want to use it, then that's not great. So really, it's finding that sweet spot for you that is giving you the maximum amount of security with the amount of, say, the small amount of friction or inconvenience that you can still deal with. Because we've all got so used to things happening online so fast. When we have to enter an extra code or something, we think, oh my gosh, I just want to get straight into my account. But it's actually that little bit of friction that keeps you safe.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, because I think we are a little bit of a now, aren't we? Of the kind of society, you know. I was speaking to somebody just about their loading speed on their website. They were, you know, saying that it didn't matter too much because I was just setting, I was like, oh, I just don't think people are patient enough for that anymore.
They're not.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. I noticed that actually, like that. And it's, you know, obviously the way that these things are configured, but I noticed that the Stuff website can take a few sort of seconds to load sometimes, and you know, it feels like it's forever when in fact it is literally, you know. So yeah, the other thing to think about with all of these sorts of things is that we want to look at this again in that layered way, right? So passwords, multi-factor authentication are absolutely critical, and they're the two main things or two of the main things that CyberSmart Weeks are looking at this year, but also automatic updates and also privacy. So auto updates are really important because almost always when an update gets pushed through to your phone or operating system, it includes some security fixes. So basically how that works is that companies like, you know, Apple and Google run programs that are called bug bounty programs. So there are people that make a living looking for vulnerabilities in people's software. They notify the company, depending on how big a vulnerability is, they get paid. And that gives the company time to fix it, and that vulnerability doesn't get released out into the wild, as it were. So if you get those updates through, they're usually including security fixes. Some of them are minute, some of them are more significant. So set up auto updates and just get them to work so that you wake up in the morning and it's been loaded. But if you get prompted and you haven't done the auto update, then, you know, really do recommend that you do select those updates. You can always click and see what's in the update. For a lot of people, you know, when you get into the more technical detail, it might not make that much sense. So, you know, I would just recommend, unless you've got a really, really good reason not to, then accept that as soon as you possibly can. So that keeps your devices and your operating systems as up to date as they can possibly be. And then the fourth thing is around privacy. So, you know, cybersecurity, we often think of, that's really the device, right? It's the device, it's the network, it's the system, whereas privacy is more about the data itself. But they're two sides of the same coin. And we have, over the last, you know, 10, 15 years, put so much of our personal information online and made it available. And sometimes we don't have a choice. Sometimes there's information that's in the public domain that we'd prefer not to have there, but we can't do anything about it. But whatever you can control, which is often your social media and these types of things, then shut it down as much as you possibly can. So yeah, it might be nice if people send you a birthday message on Facebook, but the risk is it means that people know when your birthday is. So, you know, it's a trade-off between the kind of that, I guess, the nice side of it, and then the risk that you're introducing. So obviously we can't change our date of birth. We can't change things like our IRD number. We can't change our phone number very easily, or even email addresses are a bit of a pain to change. So the more of that information that's out there, the more can be sort of joined together and used against you, either for identity theft or scams or fraud. So, you know, one of the easiest things you can do is go into your social media accounts and just check your privacy settings and look at who you're sharing information with. And it can now be very granular. You can have a very small group of people. Maybe it's just really close friends and family members that you share most things with. And also only those small number of people can see that really, really important personal information. So, you know, it's springtime, so good time for a bit of a spring clean in that regard. I kind of recommend don't try and tackle it all in one go. Maybe say, you know, this week I'm going to put an hour in my diary and I'm going to look at passwords. Next week I'm going to look at my privacy settings. Do it sort of like that and make it a regular thing rather than something that you think I've got to sit down and spend a whole day on it, because let's face it, we'll never get around to a whole day on sort of cybersecurity. So
yeah, no, these are some great tips. I really appreciate all the information that we've gotten here today. I think that passwords are that standard, but I didn't really think about updates and the effect that not updating can happen. And I know that although I've got automatic updates on, sometimes if you have it set where it's only, it'll only do it at night, or it wants to do it during the day, and you're like, try it later, try me in an hour, and you keep pushing it back, And for a person like me, like I very rarely actually shut. I've had to make myself get in the habit of actually restarting my computer instead of just closing, like actually doing a restart. It's amazing. Sometimes there's been times where I've actually shut it down or done a restart, and it's taken so much time because it's done all of these massive updates that I haven't done in so long. So if that's you, have a think about that and actually shut yourself down then.
That is a really good, and there's another benefit to that as well, is that you kind of allowing your system to kind of reset itself to a certain extent as well. So you'll probably see some improvements in performance from shutting down. You'll save power if you've got your computer switched off overnight. There's all sorts of good reasons to do it. If you're the kind of person that thinks I'll never get around to these things, then just put a little bit of time in your diary on a regular basis. Because unfortunately, cybersecurity is not really set and forget. It is something that you need to always be chipping away at. And that's because obviously the different types of threats and attacks are changing all the time as well. So we need to always be trying to keep up to date with what sort of attackers are doing. And one thing you can do is you can go to the CERT NZ website and sign up for updates from them, and they will push out updates occasionally. But if you do these basic things, you will be in the best possible position. So the other things that are not mentioned this year, specifically in this week, but are listed in CERT's critical controls. So critical controls are basically the top 10 things. If these were in place, most of those cyber breaches would not have been successful as backups. So I just wanted to give special mention to that, because if we are thinking about all of our important information, and we know that things like ransomware and things can happen, then make sure that anything that's really important to you, whether it's family photos or whether it's business critical IP, is backed up somewhere. So now a lot of people use cloud backups. If it's really important, I recommend more than one backup. So maybe one in the cloud and maybe one physical backup. And of course, and coming full circle with backups, the critical thing is making sure that the password that you associate with your backup is also strong. So you can sort of see we're coming in this full circle, and that's where using a password manager and keeping track of all that is very helpful as well. So, if nothing else, working on passwords will really, really will really help. So you can see my background actually is a website which is called Information is Beautiful, and they have a constantly updated infographic of the top 500 passwords. And I'm going to share my screen and we can just have a little look at it interactively as well. It's really interesting because the most popular password is always password. So, that's why I said at the beginning, I wasn't kidding, that if you are doing something that is better than that, you will be better off than most people. So let's just share.
Yeah, I was just looking for that site to drop it in the chat. Is it informationisbeautiful.net?
It's informationisbeautiful.net. It sure is.
Okay. So that folks could have a look themselves.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting to play with actually, because you can see that you've got actually that's a good idea. People can have a little look at it themselves, because you could basically see that what you've got there is you can filter it, but the way that all of their infographics work, because it's a really cool site, you might want to look at other stuff on there as well, is the size also is indicative of the number of things that people have been used. Yeah, so we can pop CERT in there as well. So are you able to do that, Anamari, or do you want me to pop that into the chat?
I am just grabbing the actual one on passwords. So that's the 500 passwords visualized. I guess I'll Yeah, it just actually has names. Most common passwords is yours here. That's where you are, right? That's what you were looking
Yep.
at?
Yep,
Okay.
that's the one.
I'll just
Yep.
drop those across the platforms really quickly. And what did you say, Paul? I'm so sorry.
cert.govt.nz.
Okay. Yep. I'll grab that for you.
Yeah. So one good thing about the CERT site is that there is some really good, simple information around. So if you're thinking, okay, as a password manager for me, then have a read about their advice is very, because it's sort of quasi-government. It is very balanced. They're not trying to sell anything. So have a good look at that. There is also another site which is passwordmanager.com. And that has really good reviews and comparative information. So if you're trying to choose which password manager is for you, that could be a good one to have a look at. So what I'm noticing with security software is that it's becoming more and more fully featured. So basically, password managers used to do one thing. All they used to do was give you somewhere secure to store your passwords. Increasingly, they offer things like dark web monitoring. So basically looking for any of your information in a data breach. They also look at things like, some of them have got special features for travel. So if you're crossing borders, which now, we're now able to do that again, you can effectively delete everything so it's not on your phone. And then when you get through the border, you can reinstall it. And that can be useful because in some countries, so the US has been a country that's done this for a while, they ask you for information, they ask you to open accounts and show them this kind of thing. So you just don't want to be in a position where that is something that you're being asked to do. So if you just don't have the information, then obviously you can't show it to anybody. They also offer things like VPN. So VPNs are virtual private networks. Best way to think about a VPN is like a secure tunnel. So you have your device and you are trying to access something on a server somewhere, whether it's your bank or whether it's an e-commerce site. So if you're on an insecure network, it's possible for people to see that traffic that's going from you to that other server. If you've got this secure tunnel, this VPN connection, then people can't see in effectively. VPNs are also used for other things like getting around geo-blocking on streaming services, but from a security perspective, the purpose of them is to give you that extra, to create that secure tunnel. So again, if you travel a lot, if you want to use networks that are Wi-Fi networks in cafes or hotels or airports, then I would recommend you use a VPN. So again, you might find there's lots of individual VPNs you can choose. Go for a paid for one as well. Definitely don't go for the free option, because I think in this case, if you are not paying for it, you're effectively the product, so you want to make sure that you're paying for that service, and you might decide to bundle it with your password manager, or you might decide you want something separate. Again, it's a kind of, what am I actually going to use? What makes it as easy as possible? And, there are lots of reviews and things out there about which services are best and meet people's needs. But again, something's better than nothing. So I also think we'll start to see a lot more. So, Apple in particular have already tried to make a bit of a play around privacy and security. So we will probably see increasing tools in that regard on Apple devices as well going forward. So Apple is a bit more of a walled garden. It's more secure than, Android, because of the way that things are much more locked down. So, that's another thing for people to consider.
Okay, interesting. I didn't know that. And I didn't realize that you could use a VPN even if you were using like a free Wi-Fi connection at a cafe. So
yeah, that's a really good use for it, because what it does is it means you don't, because you're using that free Wi-Fi, you don't know how it's been set up, how secure it is. You don't even really know if it really comes from the cafe. It could be someone sitting in their car outside and they've named it something cafe, like that kind of thing happens. And so what you do is you use that virtual private network, and that means you've created your own secure network. The other option people have is they can create a hotspot from their phone. So their phone itself connected to their computer, or just using their data connection on their phone will be more secure than using free Wi-Fi. So for most people, they've got unlimited data now. So that can be another option if you don't have. So Bianca's asking which you know, there's
VPN you
more
would
than one,
recommend.
but I could recommend Nord VPN. That would be one
Is
one
that
option.
like that?
NORD. Yeah, without the E.
Oh,
NORD.
okay.
A lot of these services offer you a really super cheap deal for the first year, and then they go up to full price in the second year. So, you know, you can always shop around if you wanted to switch. But yeah, that would be one of the options.
I'll
Yeah,
just
great. Thanks for
into the
that,
chat.
Anamari.
Yeah, no
That's the
worries.
link. Yeah. So again, you know, you can see something like a VPN plus a password manager plus a second factor authentication. They're all adding those extra layers to the onion. And again, focus on your most important accounts. So, you know, emails, socials, bank, those things are all really, really important. And then ultimately everything will one day have a second factor of authentication associated with it. And we will be moving away from passwords. Things will be much more related to sort of biometrics and this sort of thing. So we can all say that would be great when that happens. I mean, Microsoft are already experimenting with sort of passwordless in some instances. Google are experimenting with forcing everybody to use a second factor of authentication. So they won't do it until it's running really smoothly, but I recommend you get yourself ahead of the curve and start doing that now and get used to it. And you'll see that actually it really does just add a sort of a tiny amount of additional time in terms of you know, accessing accounts. And of course, if it slows you down slightly, it also slows down any attacker as well. And that's got to be well worth it.
Oh, we've got a question here from Rachel. It says, thanks so much for all the info. How often should we change our passwords?
Now that's a really brilliant question. So that was one of the other pieces of advice we used to get, right? We used to get told you have to change your password frequently. So, but all the research shows that if people change their password frequently, they usually make it less secure because it's hard to think of yet another password. So if you have got a unique, long, strong password that you're managing with second factor authentication, you don't need to change it. Yeah, you don't need to.
I love that. I love that you just said that.
Yeah, because isn't it a pain?
Honestly, if I try to make them really complex, and then, you know, and then the next time I'm like, oh, like it just gets
what do
too
I do
much
now?
because there's so many, you know. I mean, my password manager manages it now, but it's like, yeah, it just thinking of another, you know. What do you think about when it recommends you because like LastPass and Google Chrome password, like Chrome, you know, whatever that is called, they will both recommend a strong password. What do you recommend? Would you recommend going with those, you know, those ones that they put forward?
Yeah, okay. So if you use a sort of on-device password manager, like you're using the password manager in Chrome, the downside of that is if you want to access that site from another device and you're not using Chrome and you're not logged in as yourself using that same Google account, then that's going to be a challenge. The same thing doesn't apply with LastPass because you could access it from multiple devices as long as you've got the right type of subscription. So if you've got a paid for subscription, you can have you can either have the app on your phone, you can have a browser extension so that you just have access to it all the time, or you can log in via the website version. So you've got more options using a password manager because you can access it from multiple devices. But your question was about using the recommended password. So when you set up your LastPass or other password manager, you can choose whether you create the password. So if you want it to be something like 4 random words, and the kind of reason you might want that, say you're setting up Netflix and you know that you're going to have to use that password to log in on your television. It can be a real pain if you've got a password that is 16 random characters. It's like, you know, A, X, ampersand, hash. Like it's really hard for the human brain to take those 16 characters and find them via your remote. Yeah. So in that instance, using 4 random words is going to be a lot easier. However, if it's something that you're using mainly via other devices, you can actually get LastPass to create a super long password, and then it won't be 4 random words. It will be, you can choose as many characters. I think you can go up to 64 characters, and it will be totally random. So you just have to think about when am I going to use this password? If I ever need to type it in, having that super random thing can be really tricky. I can be looking at my phone and trying to type it, but it's going to be a lot easier if it was words. So that's when I would choose to use words versus what they've suggested. But if you're using it directly on the same device, then that's absolutely fine.
And those are all encrypted, right? Like we don't have to.
Absolutely.
I guess that was my main question. I love that tip though, because I haven't really thought about that. I've been using the strong, whatever they're suggesting. I'm like, go with them. I don't want to have to think about creating a password, and I haven't really thought about the ramifications of having to do that on my phone. But I was just wondering, is that actually secure, or is that something we've been, just one of those other things that we're trusting these guys and maybe we shouldn't, but that's great.
So I would prefer, so in the same way that when you are prompted to create a login to an account, you often get a login with Facebook or login with Google. I recommend not doing that because again, you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. So I would suggest that having an independent third party that is a specialist security provider would be a better option. But if the alternative is doing nothing and using an insecure password, then absolutely, use that Chrome option. That's absolutely fine. It's all kind of, it's like a ladder between, so taking that first step is good, taking the next step is better, the third step is probably, the best option. But the best option, while it might be more secure, it might be more complicated, it might have cost associated with it. If that's not for you, then even taking the first step or the second step is still great. So just be pragmatic. Something is better than nothing when it comes to cybersecurity.
Another question here is kind of about the process of cracking passwords. It says, how do the programs crack a password? Does it try one character at a time and keep cycling through until it finds the first character and then goes to the second, then third, etc.? Like, how do they actually go about hacking passwords?
So there's multiple methods. There are things called dictionary attacks where they're basically working on kind of known words. And if you look at that information is beautiful link, you'll see that they would have a lot of success because there are lots of passwords that are things like tiger or monkey or password, so that's super easy, right? There's a lot of just single words out there. And then the second thing is taking that big cache of passwords from data breaches that are out there either on the dark web or on the main web and trying those. So that's going to be really successful in a lot of instances. There are lots of different ways. I can probably find something and I'll add it to the list of resources that we'll publish after today, which will go through a little bit more of that, those options. But there are brute force attacks that just try multiple options. And obviously as computing gets faster and faster and faster, and it also depends on how securely the password has been stored at the other end, right? And so when a online service is created, there's obviously everything from storing unencrypted passwords that are really, really easy to access and hack into to fully encrypted and really hard to access. And when you're creating an online account, you're not really thinking about that. You're probably going to assume that people like your bank or these types of services are on the more secure side, but in some instances, you've just got no way of knowing. So you kind of just got to work on the basis that anything obvious is going to be a bad option. And the other thing that's happening is that hackers always are looking for new ways of doing things. So they're incredibly creative, right? Sitting in an office building as a hacker and creating phishing and ransomware attacks is way easier to do than other types of organized crime and really, really profitable. So, there will be things that there'll be different types of attacks that happen that we haven't even thought about yet. But the main issue with passwords is people creating insecure passwords in the first place, not so much, hacking into databases and accessing passwords. Hopefully with all the different breaches that we're seeing, so there was the Pinnacle Health breach recently, which was a piece of software that's used by a lot of general practice surgeries. Didn't have medical information, but it had personal information. When we see these sorts of things, hopefully all of these different providers and different sectors are going to start to ask the right questions when they're commissioning software and ask about things like encryption and security, because there's a lot of very, very old and insecure software out there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think that's like the next step in developing software, where it's like where we're kind of trying to push the industry towards, like when they put through for a project or something, what is the security that's built into this software? Where is, was not really a part of that, a push for, hey, I've got this amazing software that I want to create and I'm looking for funding. Like the funding bodies weren't going, oh, but what's the security look like? It was all about what is the profitability, what, what problem does this solve? But then because the security is not built into the software, then it's having to, do it after the fact. I mean, it's the same. I mean, in a similar effect, it's like building software, not putting accessibility in there, trying to add accessibility later is really difficult, so building these things in from the beginning, it's just going to make everybody's life a lot easier. I mean, of course, then we get that development on the other end of the more we develop, the more the industry of, it's always this cycle, isn't it? But that's just the way it is. Okay, so
it is. But so what you're talking about has got a term in security. It's called security by design. And effectively, if for anyone who's on this call that's ever going to be commissioning software, it's one of the most important things that you can talk to your developers about. What we don't want to do is say afterwards, right, we've built this, now let's add some security over the top. What we need to do is at every single stage, you want to build in security. And the same with privacy. So you want to factor those things in. And what that would look like, let's take the password example. A great website that has really, really been built with security by design in mind won't let you create a password that's password, right? You shouldn't be allowed to do that because that is insecure and it's just bad practice. So, what the best online services will do is if you try to create a password that is monkey or tiger or password, it won't let you. It'll require you to do something else. Now, unfortunately, most of what people are required to do is just meet that criteria of 8 characters, special character, uppercase, lowercase number, which is old-fashioned and unfortunately not right. And things like building in multi-factor or two-factor authentication to the process, that would be another example of security by design. Privacy by design might be things like not asking for every personal piece of information. Like if you're only ever going to communicate with somebody online, you don't need to know their physical address. Don't ask them for it. Just maybe you want a postcode because you want to do some demographic information, but then that's much more secure for that individual rather than tying them down to a specific address. Same with date of birth, So security by design is a big thing, and we're going to start to see more of it. Privacy by design is encoded into the GDPR, which is the European Data Protection Regulations, and so they're stricter rules than we have here in New Zealand, but if anything, we'll end up going that way too. So if you're running a business and you're thinking about any kind of development or you're commissioning new services, asking about security and privacy up front will be good for your customers, but it will also help to future-proof things for your business as well.
And also, I guess, like on this topic of just businesses and that the difference between HTTP and TTPS, like making sure that you're certified and you've got authentication, that you're a secure website. That's one of the things that our checkable will check for. Are you secure? Is your website secure? It gives your customers or, your clients, whoever they are, a sense of security in dealing with you online. And so it does. 100%. I always look for it. I always look for that little lock. I want to know.
You're looking for the padlock in the browser. And one thing you can do is you can install a free piece of software, which is called HTTPS Everywhere. And what that does is it forces when you search for something and you want to go to a website, it will only let you go to the secure version because it's very easy, right? We're all busy and people are doing things on their phone and maybe they're doing stuff late at night, and it's really easy to go and accidentally go to a site that's not secure. If you do force yourself to the secure site, then that means that there's no risk that you're putting your personal information in a site where it's not secure. So if you do see that warning pop up that says this site's not secure, don't do what most people do and say, I'll go there anyway. Don't. Just you need to either find another way of contacting that business or, transact with somebody else.
Now, I've just dropped that in the chat. Can you just double check that's correct?
Yeah, it's from
That's
the
for Mac.
electronic.
I mean, I'm on a Mac,
Yeah,
so.
if you just go to Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, and they've
Yeah.
got a link to HTTPS anywhere. Related to that also is if people are sick of being followed by ads around the web, then using a privacy-focused browser is a really good start. So Brave and DuckDuckGo are two browsers in that regard. But I can put all of these links. We'll just put them all into a document, and we can just share it with everybody who's.
Yeah, that would be great. I was just thinking about the folks that are on social media. Well, sorry, did you say it was Electronic Frontier Language or?
Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Oh, it is Frontier Foundation. Okay, I did find them. I just thought I wasn't sure. If it was them.
And they have a lot of tools actually. So if you follow that EFF link to get to HTTPS anywhere, you can also have a look at the other things they have in terms of privacy and tracking and this sort of thing.
Okay, I found it. This is the shorter. Sorry.
That's great.
There we go.
Yeah, so perfect. Thank you so much, Anamari. Yeah, well, I always feel like our time together goes so quickly, but I've really enjoyed speaking with you, and hopefully people got the answers to the questions that they wanted. Obviously happy to add anything else in to the notes that we share afterwards if anyone puts anything else into the chat.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for coming on for this kind of cyber smart weeks here and educating on this. I always get something new from you, Paula, which is awesome. Or even when I think about things, I often don't think about that next layer, but that's why you're the expert and we're here to learn from you. And I do implement things that I learned from here. I have to say, sometimes we just listen and we don't do. I want to assure you that that I'm going out there and doing it. If I'm doing it, that I'm pretty sure that others are as well, because I'm kind of one of those people like, oh, it's a bit hard. What? I don't get it. But the more and more I get into tech, the more I realize how important this aspect is. And it just can't be ignored. So just some comments here. Super helpful and reassuring to know I'm on the right track and being cyber smart. Thanks heaps. You're welcome, Bianca. So glad that you joined us today. And I'll just want to double check before we drop off, anyone on LinkedIn, I just need to refresh that. It doesn't always pull through things in the chat. Just want to make sure I haven't missed anybody's questions. For those of you following with us on those platforms, I can see you. Kia ora, and all of those links are there for you. But if you're not registered to Digital Boost, you've missed out on other sessions we've run with Paula. And I would highly recommend you jumping onto platform and just doing a little search and checking out some of the other sessions that we've run. If you wanted to get your website kind of analyzed for different things, use the checkable tool. It'll do that. It'll talk about security in there as well. And deriskme is you're a small business as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
So if people wanted to get a hold of you, the best way would be probably through
either LinkedIn or through the website directly, which is deriskme.com. I'll make sure that's a good reminder. I'll make sure I put that onto the list of resources that we're going to share later as well. Yeah, great.
So I'll drop that in the chat really quickly for you guys if you want to have a look at that. Obviously LinkedIn, I'm on there, Paula's on there. We love to chat with folks on that platform. I think it's a really great platform for businesses to connect on. And it's kind of like a no drama kind of place. Well, at least it is on my feed. It's real positive. It's a real place to learn and, be excited about other people's success. And we love hearing about your success and what's going on for your business. So please, get in touch with us if you like on LinkedIn. And have a wonderful day. This Thursday, we're going to be writing a business plan. So we're doing like an actual business strategy kind of thing in our workshop with Jung, who's a business coach. And I think it's going to be really great. He's very inspirational kind of guy. So it should be a bit of fun. And I look forward to having you guys come along to that. So thanks, Paula. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks so much. Have a great week, everybody.
Ka kite.